Welcome back, everybody, to the Fantasy Birds. We are back with some more fantasy football content, getting you geared up for your fantasy football drafts in the 2023 season. Great information today. We are going over 5 must-draft running backs, 5 dudes I love drafting based on where they're currently going in your fantasy drafts. Let's not waste your time. Let's hop into my 5 must-draft running backs in fantasy football 2023. My first must-draft running back is Joe Mixon for the Cincinnati Bengals. It feels like each and every year Mixon is continuously slept on, going way later in drafts than he really should be. Maybe this has something to do with his efficiency numbers. However, Mixon has been a top 10 running back in 4 of the past 5 seasons. So at running back 16, so much value for Mixon to provide for your fantasy team where you're getting him and based on where he can finish at the end of the season. We know Cincinnati is one of the best offenses in the National Football League, so getting the number 1 running back in the mid-rounds seems like robbery in your fantasy drafts. Not only is he on one of the best offenses in the league, but he has really no running back competition. The only guy they bring in, they draft a running back in the 5th round in the NFL draft, so not much competition. They lose Samaje Perine, who was getting most of the work behind Mixon last year. He's now in the Denver Broncos. So Mixon's going to lead this backfield. I'm not worried about him missing any time with legal troubles. I think that's also baked into his price. So at running back 16, getting him in the mid-rounds, I'm slamming Joe Mixon, especially when we look at some of his numbers from last season. He's top 10 in red zone touches and overall usage rate, so he's getting the ball all over the field, and especially in the red zone when the Bengals are cashing in for touchdowns. It's the perfect equation for a good running back in fantasy football, getting a huge workload inside the red zone and also getting receptions out of the backfield. So he's really game script proof. Last year he got 60 catches, which is a huge number for Mixon from what he was doing in prior seasons. So he's becoming more of a pass catcher in this offense. For a quarterback like Joe Burrow, I want to get his pass catchers involved in my fantasy teams because we know he's going to put up some serious numbers. Those 60 catches were good for a 14% team target share. For a running back, that is excellent numbers and landed him number 7 overall among all running backs last season. So Mixon's going to be the guy in the red zone and through the air out of the backfield for the Bengals team. I think it's a no-brainer pick where you're getting him in drafts. I'm slamming Mixon yet again this season while other people are sleeping on him. The next must-draft running back I'm going over today is going to be David Montgomery. Gets a new deal for the Detroit Lions, 3 years, $18 million. It's about $6 million a year broken down. While those aren't huge numbers, that is a pretty sizable chunk in running back free agency as of late. We know Saquon, Josh Jacobs, Pollard can't get their extensions done. So teams are really unwilling to give out money to running backs right now, and Montgomery goes out and gets $6 million a year. So I think that has something to do with what the Lions want to do with him in this offense. We're not expecting Montgomery to be a 3-down workhorse running back, but for where you're getting him in drafts, you don't need him to be that. All we need Montgomery to do is fill in that Jamal Williams role, which is probably what they brought him in to do. Last year, Jamal Williams, we know, huge season for the Lions, led the NFL in red zone touches and touches inside the 10 and 5-yard line. So with Jamal Williams being so productive in this offense and in this exact role last season, while David Montgomery is going to be a much better prospect and more talented running back, I think he's going to fill that role very nicely. Now, I don't expect him to put up the 17 touchdowns that Jamal did last season, which made him one of the best pickups and drafted players in all of fantasy last season. I do think he's going to be much more efficient in his touches. We saw how good of a running back Montgomery was in his 4 years in Chicago. In all 4 seasons, he's getting over 200 carries for the Bears. Not only was the workload there, but also in 2022, he was top 10 in juke rate and evaded tackles. So he's got a little bit of shiftiness to his game that I think is going to be very beneficial for a Lions team that has said they want to run the ball down people's throats. With a great offensive line and some of the weapons going to be suspended on the outside for the first half of the season, and Jameson Williams, this team's got to rely on the run, and I think David Montgomery's got to be a huge part of that. They do bring in Gibbs. That is a concern for Montgomery, but for how late you're getting him in drafts, I don't think you need to be banking on him getting the bulk of the receiving work out of the backfield. Gibbs is going to do that, but at 200-pound frame, I don't think Gibbs is going to be able to garner any sort of workload inside the red zone. That's going to be Montgomery at 225. More muscle on that bone to get inside the end zone. That's why I want to be banking on Montgomery and not Gibbs as where he's going in drafts in the 3rd, 4th round. Such a great value for Montgomery. That's why he's our second must-draft running back this season. The next guy I'm not leaving my drafts without is going to be Najee Harris. Obviously, this is going to ruffle some feathers as Najee is one of the biggest busts in the 2022 season. But there's a couple factors that I think led to his season being a little bit disappointing for where you're getting him in drafts. Not much light was shed on the injury that Najee sustained in August of last season. a foot injury that lingered throughout a majority of the year. So while Najee's playing injured, the numbers did suffer with that injury, but he's not missing games due to the injury. So that's a great sign for Najee, able to play through injury for your fantasy teams. Despite all this, even with a terrible offensive line, one of the worst in the entire league, Najee still finishes the RB14, so not really too depressing numbers there as a finish for Najee. While the beginning of the season was so terrible, still able to pick it up at the end of the year and finish inside the top 15. In 7 of the last 8 games Najee played in last year, he's giving you double-digit fantasy points, averaging right around 14 fantasy points a game during the last stretch of games. So when Najee's finally started to get a little bit healthy, his numbers actually started to increase, which sheds some light on why we think Najee's a must-draft player this season. You don't have to pay that first-round tag you were paying for him last year. You get him in the 4th round. For a team that bolstered their offensive line with 4 new offensive linemen coming into the team, this roster wants to play through the run game and develop Kenny Pickett in only his 2nd year in the NFL. Let's remember, Najee Harris was a first-round pick out of the University of Alabama, so there's a bunch of talent there with a better offensive line, a young quarterback in year 2 developing at the position. This offense could look a lot better, and I really want to be banking on Najee where he's going in drafts. The volume will be there. It's just a matter of getting those efficiency numbers up. And if Harris is able to stay healthy and come into the year healthy, I really like him where he's going in drafts, especially when you consider the Pittsburgh Steelers' strength of schedule is extremely favorable to the running back position. The rush defense is one of the worst in the leagues they'll be facing this year. So Najee at a huge discount compared to where you were getting him in drafts last year. I love slamming Najee, especially if you decide to go wide receiver, tight end, or quarterback in the first 3 rounds at a much cheaper value. Next running back I want to talk about is Elijah Mitchell. I talked about him in my sleepers video. You can go check that out on the channel, but Mitchell is one of my favorite players to draft this year because he's the clear #1 handcuff in fantasy football. Now, I don't always want to be targeting handcuffs in fantasy, but when Mitchell's going to have more than just handcuff value, I think it's a great spot to be targeting him when he's going to see a good amount of volume to keep CMC healthy on that San Francisco team long term. San Francisco's playing for the Super Bowl. They're playing for the longevity of the year. So I don't expect CMC to dominate this backfield in touches. I think Mitchell's going to work into it a lot more than people expect. And last season, when CMC was on the 49ers, Mitchell still carved out 60 yards per game at 6 yards per carry. He's always been an efficient running back. That's just how the Shanahan offense in San Francisco is going to be. It's a great offensive scheme to be a running back in. Now, let's not forget, in 2021, Mitchell, in his breakout season, Elijah Mitchell was top 10 in efficiency numbers and yards per touch in fantasy. So he's already shown the ability to not need a huge workload in order to provide some very stable fantasy production. And how late you're getting him in drafts to go along with that handcuff appeal, I think Mitchell should be slammed in all your drafts. How you can get him so late. The last guy on my list today is going to be Cam Akers, the running back for the Los Angeles Rams. Another guy like Najee Harris who disappointed many fantasy owners last season. But this is a new year, and Akers, just like Najee, turned it around at the end of the season. Let's not forget, while Cam Akers technically came into the season healthy, he was still recovering from that Achilles tear just 1 season prior. So we can't really fault the Los Angeles Rams for kind of working Akers back up to that workload that he had at the end of the season. Darrell Henderson cut from the team. They moved on from him, giving the workload to Cam Akers. And Sean McVay's even said in this offseason, Akers is going to be a central figure in this Rams offense. If we're drafting Cooper Kupp in the 1st round, I think Cam Akers, where he's going in drafts, has definitely some appeal to be a good spot. Let's look at that last stretch for Akers in the 2022 season. The final 3 games of the year, he's finishing over 100 yards each and every game. Not only that, in 7 of the last 8 games, Akers is getting over 10 carries a game. So they started working him, getting him that workload at the end of the year. We all remember that Christmas Day game against the Broncos where he absolutely explodes and probably giving a lot of people fantasy wins that particular week. But since the Achilles tear, the problem with him has been the efficiency numbers. But in his last 4 games, he's over 5 yards per carry, which is a very stout number for a running back to achieve. So Akers, a very talented player out of Florida State. Definitely going to take some time when you tear your Achilles to get back to that speed and burst that you initially had prior to the injury. And I think 2 years removed from this injury is right where I want to be drafting Cam Akers. This is a spot where I wanted to be looking into taking J.K. Dobbins, but with the recent news being on the PUP list, I'm not too concerned about it, but they do bring in Melvin Gordon, which causes me even more concern. Gordon, I know at this point in his career, he's absolutely cooked. There's no value and reason to be drafting Melvin Gordon, but if they're bringing him to the team, maybe that tells me that he's not 100% okay, that they're looking to get more running backs incorporated. So I did want to put J.K. Dobbins on this list, but being on the temporary PUP list not necessarily means he's missing any games. I want to get more information before I'm willing to put all my chips in on J.K. Dobbins, who nearly made this list, but the recent news caused just a little bit of concern why I kept him off. But these are my 5 must-draft running backs. All of these options are going past the 3rd round in your fantasy drafts, and some of them extremely late in most contests. Let me know what y'all think. I got Joe Mixon, David Montgomery, Najee Harris, Elijah Mitchell, and Cam Akers, 5 of my favorite running backs to draft this season. Let me know in the comment section what you think of these guys. If you agree or disagree, I'm loving hearing your guys' opinions. Even when you're disagreeing, let me know how stupid these picks are. But that's going to wrap it up here. Appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you guys next week with another episode of the Fantasy Birds.